Hey, it's the Plague Special! Yeah! It's a Conspiracy is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network powered by ATB. For a list of other fun programming, please check out the albertapodcastnetwork.com, where you can find shows like Calgary Culture, the Perspectives YYC podcast. Welcome back, everyone, to It's a Conspiracy. This is the podcast where we lay out the beliefs behind selected conspiracy theories, alternative accounts, legends, myths, and more. I'm your host, Andrew, and I do not claim to be an expert on anything we are going to discuss today, and will probably be wrong about everything as usual, because I'm using Lysol wipes on all my surfaces, including my steering wheel, trying not to touch my face, which I didn't realize I did so much, and trying to think of new things to do with my kids who are trapped inside and going bloody stir crazy. I'm also not an expert on recording from home, and I'm now recording this on my own, and we're going to bring in the guys on some remote recordings, and it's all a bit of a gong show, but hey, we're just one day at a time. If you'd like to see where we dug up whatever cabin fever chowder we're going to discuss today, then please check out the resources in the episode description. Charlie disinfects those with isopropyl and then inserts them caringly in the clean place, episode after episode, for you to care about. Lastly, we are a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. Yay, team. Yay, TB, right? Hey, that's a good joke. You can check us out online at our website, it'saconspiracypodcast.com, Twitter at It's a Conspiracy, that's run by the Irish Madman, our Facebook group, the Instagram, It's a Conspiracy Podcast, that's run by Greg, our email, It's a Conspiracy at protonmail.com, and our Patreon page, patreon.com/It's a Conspiracy. That doesn't have the same ring without the guys joining me on that. Oh, my heart. Joining the communication time today is nobody. So it's just me on my own. I'm going to have some clips. This is the first of our entries recorded under quarantine, and we're still trying to figure out exactly how to do this. So for simplicity's sake, we decided to go with individually recorded segments, so we won't have the usual chimings in of our well-timed banter, but for this reason I've got the lads to record a few key phrases to put in at the opportune moment. Here's a few right here.
Super neat.
My name is Greg, and I agree with that completely.
Right then, Charlie, with a yes or no, can you tell me if you've heard of any of these three theories?
Maybe.
Number 1, the Black Death.
Maybe.
Number 2, 5 lesser known plagues throughout history.
Maybe.
Number 3, the 10 plagues of Egypt.
Maybe.
All right, subject number 1, the Black Death.
He says he's not dead. Yes, he is. I'm not.
First off, let's talk about what a plague is. Dr. Rye, if you don't mind sharing your thoughts on what a plague is.
Okay, so when people are talking about the plague or plague, it's actually referring to a specific disease caused by specific bacterium. So in Europe, when the plague happened, or Black Death, it caused a lot of death in Europe. It was considered an epidemic. It was localized to Europe and it killed millions of people, but it was contained to Europe. So the plague that's referred to there is actually a bacterium-based infection. Other people might refer to plague in the big biblical sense, so think pestilence. And that is a disease caused by, well, either way that you take it, they are very different than what the current coronavirus is, because the current coronavirus is actually a virus, not a bacterium, not caused by God. So very different in that sense.
Now, often when people say plague, the first thought is the Black Death. It's not likely the worst plague we've ever seen. It wasn't the first. It wasn't the most recent. But for whatever reason, it is the most famous. It's basically the Richard Dean Anderson of plagues. Now, in the mid-14th century, the Black Death killed every single person in Europe. If you were listening to this in Europe, I'm sorry, you died 600 years ago, and a ham will be sent to your widow. Well, she died 600 years ago as well, but okay, you get the idea. The generally accepted theory of what caused the bubonic plague is that it was spread by black rats. The scientific name for the black rats, coincidentally, is Rattus rattus. leading us to believe that this was a placeholder, and the introduction of the real name was interrupted by every single person in Europe dying. It's hard to think of a name when everyone is dead. Now, there are a couple of alternative theories as to what caused it, and alternative theories are what we are all about. Susan Scott and Christopher Duncan from the Liverpool University suggest that it was a thing like Ebola, the virus we all know and love that liquefies your insides and makes them ooze out through your pores like a big bowl of oatmeal. The reasoning behind that is that it spread between people far quicker than other confirmed bubonic plagues, and interestingly, there's a degree of genetic immunity to Ebola-like diseases in Europe for no obvious reason. Briefly, bubonic, a real fun word to say. Kind of sounds like a clown cyborg. All right, now another theory is anthrax. Historian Norman Cantor suggests that a medieval terror cell got together, invented the envelope, created the postal system as we know it today, and printed the first stamp just to start the bloody plague and take down the system. None of that is true, of course, but the actual cited evidence is discovery of anthrax spores in a plague pit in Scotland. But really, it's Scotland. That might have been a rave from the rave scene in the mid-90s, all that plague pit in the 90s. Also, meat from infected cattle was known to have been sold to English peasants just before the onset of the plague. So, hey, could have been a thing. Could have been a scary thing that someone did on purpose. The mainstream pro-bubonic plague crowd fight back by saying that the quick spread was caused by people coughing all over each other and not being socially isolated, you selfish bastards. Now stay home, read a book. For the love of all things holy, what the hell is the matter with you? Just stay home. Also, there are disgusting contemporary accounts of rats falling from the roofs and walls and piling high in the streets, like London most Saturday evenings since they introduced 24-hour public transport. Now, Andrew, I know you're on your own here, but what are we drinking?
What are we drinking?
We are drinking, we being I, the lovely vanilla porter from Nine Locks Brewing, located in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. To create the best beer possible, we brew in small batches using all natural ingredients, no preservatives, and no filtration, with a smooth touch of vanilla. This is real good, and I'm always banging on about the cans. And this is no exception. This is just a killer can. I actually bought it for the can. It looked like something. I was like, is that a beer? That kind of looks like a Sodoma Pop. But that's a beer. That's a vanilla porter. Good stuff. All right, that is going to take us to ad number 1.
This episode is brought to you by Unit B Co-working. Unit B is a multi-company co-working space focused on helping people pursue their passions and making Edmonton its creative best. Once normal working conditions resume, you're invited to join a tight-knit group of freelancers, startups, and established organizations, all dedicated to getting things done. Unit B Co-working is located in the historic McKenney building on 104th Street, close to everything downtown. For more information, visit unitb.ca.
And we're back. Hey, that's going to take us to our Monster of the Week from Charlie Scream. Charlie, what have you got here for us for our Monster of the Week?
Hey there, friendly foil heads. This Monster of the Week isn't really a monster per se, or even a paranormal being of any sorts. This week, to fit the theme of the episode, I'm talking about plague doctors. Easily the best-dressed doctors in history, a plague doctor was a medical physician who treated victims of the bubonic plague. In times of epidemics, these physicians were hired by towns where the plague had taken hold. Since the city was fitting the bill, they treated everyone, both the wealthy and the poor. Some plague doctors wore a special costume. I'd consider this to be a classic look. These nice fancy man garments were invented by Charles Delorme in 1630 and were first used in Naples, but later spread to be used throughout Europe. This classic look serves up bubonic plague-timey realness, consisting of a protective suit made from a light waxed fabric overcoat, a mask with glass eye openings, and a beak-shaped nose. Now, I know what you're thinking, Andrew. These beaks weren't stuffed with tasty treats like pizza or bananas, but rather stuffed with herbs, straw, and spices. Plague doctors would also commonly carry a cane to examine and direct patients without the need to make direct contact with the patient. No touching! The scented beak freshener materials included, but were not limited to, juniper berry, roses, mint leaves, cloves, myrrh, black ice, spring breeze, and new car smell scents. Woo! Due to the primitive understanding of disease at the time, it was believed that the suit would sufficiently protect the doctor from miasma, aka stinky poo-poo fart air, while tending to patients. Obviously, there are connections with the current pandemic. Stay inside, stay safe. If you do have to go out, wear a mask. If you do wear a mask, don't put food in it. Andy, I'm looking at you here, bud. And don't forget that there are so many doctors and nurses and medical professionals out in the world right now, risking their lives, doing everything they can to help us through this terrible new plague. Mad respect. Now back to you, team.
All right, thanks a bunch. That's going to take us to subject number 2.
5 lesser-known plagues throughout history. Number 1. The Plague of Justinian. Justinian I, Byzantine emperor, dealt with plague in 541 AD. Rumored to have been spread by rats off merchant ships, this beast likely killed off more than 25 million people. Plague number 2. Electric Boogaloo. There's actually no information for plague number 2. Andrew only gave me 1 and then 3. Number 3. The Italian Plague of 1629 to 31. In the wake of the 30 Years' War, soldiers returned home with plague in tow. The sickness spread through Verona, Milan, Venice, and Florence. Sicklings were marooned on a nearby island, and it's thought that upwards of 280,000 people were killed. Number 4. The Great Plague of London. Poor London. 1665 and 1666 was a real rough patch. A plague thought to be carried by pestilence broke out, and at its height was claiming 8,000 souls per week. The sick were quarantined to their homes, which would be marked with giant red crosses on the door. But ultimately, 75 to 100,000 in the city alone died. The outbreak subsided just in time for the Great Fire of London to burn most of the city centre to the ground. 5. The Great Plague of Marseille. In 1720, a ship carrying passengers to the Middle East stopped in Marseille, a port city in France. It was clear to the French authorities that there was some kind of sickness on the ship, but oddly, they still allowed their deputy mayor, who was traveling on the ship, to unload his cargo. That brief stop was enough to set off a plague, likely carried by rats, that killed over 100,000 people. The city of Provence erected massive plague walls that can be seen today. 6. The Third Plague Pandemic. In 1855, a massive third wave of bubonic plague broke out in the Chinese province of Yunnan. This strain, carried by fleas aboard steamships, was never quarantined properly and ended up claiming 15 to 25 million lives right up until the mid-1950s. Bonus plague. The Tyrolean Plague. The Tyrolean Plague was a biological weapon.
Yeah, man.
Used during the Tyrolean Civil War, which, by 2336, had all but wiped out the species. According to Dr. Beverly Crusher, the Tyroleans had reached Earth's late 20th century level of knowledge. That's all you need if you're a damn fool. A deadly, infectious virus, which at that modest level of knowledge is not difficult to grow. According to Captain Jean-Luc Picard, it was believed that the last Tyrolean vessel was destroyed years ago by the Alcyon.
Hey, thanks a bunch. That is going to take us to ad number 2.
In the modern world, for men, modern society has created a reawakening of the question, what does it mean to be a man? It is not as clear-cut as it once was, and the answers are as varied, infinite, and complex as can be. This is where the podcast Modern Manhood comes in. Join me, Herman Villegas, as we explore how the different views of masculinity shape our daily life. For example, how the way we date, parent, school, and play are affected by the many shapes modern masculinity has its handle on us. This is the lives of men, as flawed, authentic, and complex as can be. This is Modern Manhood, a proud podcast of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATV.
All right, here we are. Subject number 3, the 10 plagues of Egypt.
Let my people go, 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 go.
All right, now every spring, Jewish people around the world celebrate Passover, a holiday that tells the story of the Exodus. This is when the Jews who had been slaves left Egypt for the Promised Land, aka Israel. Moses, the leader of this motley crew, spent years working on the Pharaoh, who just wouldn't budge on the issue. As an incentive to play nicely, Moses told the Pharaoh that God would send 10 plagues, each more horrible than the last, to change his mind. Pharaoh was stubborn, but also confused. After all, Pharaoh's dad was a mummy. All right, plague number 1, blood. Moses struck the river Nile with his staff, turning its waters to blood. At the same time, his brother Aaron performed an identical transformation in the canals, tributaries, ponds, and pools throughout Egypt. The water smelled bad, all the fish and plants died, and it was just a big, horrible mess. The pharaoh at the time is known as Ramses. My personal favorite pharaoh is Pharaoh Rocher. Plague number 2, frogs. Blood wasn't enough, so Moses called in a garrison of frogs to overrun Egypt. The frogs got everywhere, and it was real nasty. Now, how do frogs die? Well, they Kermit suicide. Kermit. Plague number 3, lice. After blood and frogs, a swarm of lice attacked the Egyptians. Everybody got lice, and it was real gross. Fun fact about lice, there are 3,500 different types, and that's just off the top of my head. Plague number 4, wild beasts. After blood, frogs, and lice, Moses decided to drop some hot wild beasts. Artistic renditions typically show snakes, scorpions, lions, and bears. Oh my! Pharaoh was very prideful and even built a massive monument to himself. He thinks he's the best. Plague number 5, diseased livestock. All the farm animals, they're all gone! Interesting side note, Moses was actually the first tennis player listed in the Bible. He served in Pharaoh's court. Plague number 6, boils. As in, boil me cabbage din! So painful blisters that would cover the bodies of the Egyptians. Ouchie! They say a watched pot never boils, but a redhead will sunburn regardless of witnesses. Plague number 7, fiery hail. This is arguably the most metal plague of them all. Fiery hail! The storms are depicted as being a cross between lightning, hail, and volcanic ash. This sounds like Mordor. Sauron! The Pharaoh saw this and said, "Oh, hail no!" Plague number 8, locusts. What little plant and animal life was left was soon devoured by the plague of locusts, a swarm that covered everything in a sick blanket of buzzing treachery. Maybe Moses was just trying to throw them a house swarming party. House swarming. Swarms. Plague number 9, darkness. And darkness for 3 days. Just pitch black. This would have been enough to have scared the Winkelknickers out of the superstitious Egyptonians. Still, the Pharaoh refused. Moses said, "Please, let my people go." Pharaoh replied, "No way." Moses replied, "Yahweh." 10, the killing of the firstborn. Finally, after blood, frogs, lice, beasts, livestock, boils, all hail no, locusts, and darkness, there came death. This is actually where the celebration of the Passover gets its name. God told Moses that for the 10th plague, he would send an angel of death to Egypt to take all of the firstborn children. In order to let the angel know who was on the death list, Moses was instructed to secretly tell the Jews to brush the blood of a slaughtered lamb over their door. If the angel saw the blood, he'd be like, "Oh, I'm not going to kill anybody in there. I'm going to go next door and kill everybody over there." So he'd pass over that house. Pass over. After these 10 plagues and the death of his own son, Pharaoh relented and let the Jews go free. Side note, the Pharaoh had many children with several wives. Women found him irresistible. It might have been his pheromones. However, shortly after that, after the Jews left, he changed his mind, assembled his men, and charged after them, probably hoping to kill them all. This is when Moses split the Red Sea so the Jews could cross safely. Pharaoh and his men charged into the sea to catch the people running away, but they weren't too fortunate. Their chariot wheels became stuck in the mud. The Jews all escaped safely to the shores on the other side, and then Moses brought the sea back together, drowning all the Egyptian pursuers. Christmas! And thus we have the timeless story of Moses. It's actually surprisingly modern. He's like, I have 10 files on my tablet from the iCloud. Here's our friend Paula to tell us a little bit about how Passover is celebrated today.
Hey, it's Paula here, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Passover, or Pesach in Hebrew. It's a Jewish holiday that celebrates freedom, specifically the exodus of the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. It's going to be celebrated this year from April 8th to April 16th. On the evening of April 8th, we have our first Seder. Seder literally means order, where we read the story of the Exodus and enjoy a big meal with certain ceremonial elements. The next night, we have a second Seder where we basically do the same thing. On normal years, this is a time for families and communities to gather for the Seders, but unfortunately, circumstances this year require that we have no guests outside of our immediate households. I've been saying that it is extremely ironic that community Seders have had to be canceled because of a plague. The biggest part of how we celebrate Passover, aside from the Seders, is by eating matzah, which is an unleavened bread that's similar to a big cracker. In fact, we don't eat any leavened food for the entire week. The reason behind this is that the Jewish people were in such a hurry to leave Egypt that they did not have time for their bread to rise. So this is Passover in a nutshell. There are a lot of excellent resources online that go into detailed explanations of the customs and traditions, as well as the history, and if you're interested, I highly recommend you check them out. Chag Pesach Kasher V'Sameach. Happy Passover to those of you who celebrate.
Well, wasn't that a voyage of smiles and waving from an appropriate social distance? Lordy, yes. Lordy, it was. Lordy, yes. Uh-huh. We really do appreciate you stopping by for a listen, and please feel free to rate, review, subscribe, tell a friend, tell your neighbor, spread the good word, be a pal. That'd be awesome. You can check out all of our past casts and social media stuff at itsaconspiracypodcast.com. And we will be back on April 16th with another big bag of potatoes. And we actually might be like working live between the three of us doing some interactive magic. We're going to figure out what we're doing here. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for stopping by. Please stay safe. Wash your hands. Stay home if you gotta. And just take care of yourself. Take care of your loved ones. And hopefully we're all back to normal really, really soon. All right. Take care. Bye-bye. Oopsie daisy, I just realized I didn't stick in those clips from Charlie and Greg. Okay, I'll put those in here. Okay.
Yes, maybe. No, real neat, super neat. That sounds great. I would love to.
Yeah, man. No thanks. That's what she said. Working hard or hardly working?